Maxwell. Are there any other apologies this morning? There to be none. So I'd like to ask for a move and a seconder that the apologies from Councillor Maxwell be accepted. Councillor Kai Fong and seconded by Councillor Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. Are there any urgent items that are not on the agenda this morning? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. I just seek some clarification on what briefings are in relation to workshops. I see that a briefing has been organised for tomorrow to deal with the Springfield Golf Course and Better Off funding.
Councillor, sorry to interrupt you, but this is probably not an urgent item, but if it's a matter of clarification around the briefing that we're going to have, then we can do that. The Mayor has actually covered that off in her email to us.
Well, yes, this is a workshop happening tomorrow, so it's urgent. Obviously, it would be too late to deal with that after tomorrow. So, I have seen the email from Mayor Tapsell in reply that says that tomorrow is to be treated as a workshop. Is that correct?
Sorry, what was your question, Councillor?
Well, my concern is whether it's going to be live streamed, and I think the venue for tomorrow's briefing is in one of the committee rooms, which I'm not aware that it has live streaming capability, whereas the chamber does. So I'm a bit confused, really.
Thank you for your question. I'll get the CE to answer that for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Tomorrow, I believe the briefing you're referring to is a confidential briefing and it won't be live streamed.
Thank you. Are there any further urgent items? Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not an urgent item, a minor matter. That's just wondering, given the recent developments with Tauranga Council and Waitaki Council, the path that they have taken, if there is any appetite or opportunity for this council to perhaps look at that at next month's meeting or another time. Thank you.
Is this with regards to fluoridation?
Fluoridation, correct.
Right. Yeah. I'll ask the CE to reply to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Certainly that item will come up in due course. My understanding of the papers, and I have read the papers from Tauranga City Council, is they sought much broader direction under their paper than brought to this council. And so cognizant of that, at the appropriate time when the matter of choosing to fluoridate our water supplies comes up, as I assured councillors, that will come back to this council. And I believe there's an opportunity to discuss this matter further during the presentation of the reports today.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Is there any further urgent items? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think we quite got to the bottom of the last issue. Do I understand correctly that the Springfield Golf Club were invited to present to tomorrow's, is it a briefing or a workshop?
My understanding is that they actually were invited to a workshop, but were unable to attend to the placeholder that we put aside. But an invitation has been extended to actually schedule another opportunity for the golf club to speak.
So would that happen in a public arena or in confidential?
Point of order, Madam Chair. I don't really see the urgency of this kōrero that we're having right now.
Thank you. I'll just cover it off by saying that yes, that will be in public, yes. And if there's anything else that the CE might like to add, I think we've covered that off.
Okay. The Springfield Golf Club represents club members. Is an invitation able to be extended to representatives of the community in Springfield?
Because it's a public forum, anybody can come to that. So we'll just leave it there, Councillor Lee, if that's okay with you. I'd like to move on because it's actually not an urgent item, and there will be the opportunity, as we've said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further urgent items, councillors? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, could I please raise an issue around the Lake Tarawera sewage scheme, but because I take this as a minor matter that doesn't require a decision today, with your permission, since I've raised it, I'd like to defer it until after Mr Michael's presentation, if that would be okay with you, because he may also touch on these matters that I wish to raise for discussion later on.
That sounds sensible if you're happy to wait until that time.
I'm happy if you are, Madam Chair.
Yes, and I think Mr Ross will be covering those matters off in his report, and you're welcome to ask questions then.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that no more urgent items, councillors?
Nothing's urgent.
Thank you. We'll move on to the confirmation of minutes. The minutes of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting held on the 7th of August. Could I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 7th of August be confirmed as true and correct, please? That's Councillor Kai Fong and seconded by Councillor Wang. Are there any matters for correction in the minutes? Councillor Peterson.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair, not a matter for correction, just a follow-up from that. There was an action point in there regarding an invitation to be sent to NZTA to give us a briefing on their plans for the state highway funding in our area. Just wondering how that's progressed. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Yes, there has been an approach made to NZTA to organise a time for them to come and speak to us. At this stage, we're aiming for the October meeting, but it hasn't finally been locked in just yet, but approach has been made.
Thank you.
Thank you. And since we're on the action points, I'll just clarify that the other action point was a map showing the fluoridated areas across with potential fluoridation, and they've been put on the website page, as you will probably be aware. That's the action points from the last meeting. So now that we've actually got a motion on the floor to pass the minutes, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour for the minutes being correct, say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. And further to the last meeting, we had a petition from Te Atawhai Aroha, and I have written a letter to the petitioners in reply to their petition. The next item on the agenda is the staff reports. The first item, local water done well, on page 23 of your agendas, councillors, is a report that I'd ask for a mover and a seconder that the report for local water done well be received. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Seconder, Councillor O'Brien. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. And I'd now invite Stavros to overview the report and speak to any questions we may have. Thank you, Stavros. I'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning all. Morena tatu katoa. I will do a brief and summary presentation about the essential nature of our report to you with regards to the local water done well update and the various phases of the legislation changes that have been taking place over the last 6 to 8 months. And the intention of this report really is to highlight for you, the elected members of this community, the main points of the report, to give you a brief update as to where we are in our considerations of how to comply with these new legislative changes, and obviously to seek your endorsement of how we propose to move forward in compliance with those legislative parameters and frameworks. A very brief outline there of the legislation phases and stages. The previous government's proposed reforms were repealed in early this year. The stage 2 of the legislation was enacted on the 3rd of September, and there's further legislation would making transitional provisions to be carried out between September and December this year. Those phases of legislation obviously are followed carefully by the organisation, and we are attempting to prepare and condition ourselves to satisfy and respond to those legislative phases of the new name local water done well legislation. The announcement that has been made yesterday with the passing of the second stage of the legislation requires us to start now preparing what the legislation refers to as service delivery plans. And within those plans and within 12 months' time, we need to have a clear articulation of financial and asset information, the investment required to meet the legislation parameters, and obviously what kind of service delivery arrangements we propose to adopt in the short, medium, and long-term future. The overarching purpose of the plan is for the councils and other individually or jointly to publicly demonstrate that the way the three waters are managed are prudent, are sustainable, and are financially in compliance with the requirements of legislation. By developing those plans, councils must provide an assessment of their three waters infrastructure, how much they need to invest to maintain a safe, reliable, and stable infrastructure to meet the level of service they aspire or to stay to, and more importantly, to meet the levels of service that are required by various legislations, especially freshwater standards, drinking water standards, reliability of the services, and so on. And obviously, how councils will be ring-fencing those three services, both in terms of their operational ability, but also in terms of their enclosed financial arrangements, their funding and revenue policy for these services to achieve those requirements. To demonstrate financial sustainability, the council will have to show what needs to be invested to deliver water services to regulated standards and to provide for growth in the future, and that growth should be consistent with the council's adopted future development strategies. They will also need to show how they will fund and finance the long-term investment in water infrastructure, including renewals and operating costs. I think one of the fundamental premises of, I suppose, of the reforms in previous years and the previous government has been that the notion that some councils were underinvesting in the three waters infrastructure, and to that effect, this legislation aims to direct councils through statutory measures to meet good clarity and ring-fencing with activities and demonstrate the satisfaction of the government or the Department of Internal Affairs that those actions are sustainable and are prudent and actually meet the standards they have established. Economic regulation was anticipated to come, anticipates that a key feature in the local waters done well is to ensure that consumers pay efficient, cost-reflective prices for water services, and that those services are delivered to an acceptable quality, and that water services providers are investing sufficiently in their infrastructure. So the legislation aims to solidify and consolidate those requirements in legislation instead of being at the prerogative of the decision-making of each individual service provider. The transitional bills obviously, provides the framework for those, for those requirements, and an expanded range of water services delivery models, including new water organizations, that can be owned by the council or consumer trusts. They are intended to be financially independent from their council owners from a credit rating perspective. Councils may design their own alternative arrangements as long as the arrangements meet minimum requirements. These include meeting regulatory standards, financial sustainability requirements, such as ring-fencing of water services and restrictions against privatization. There will be additional requirements for water organizations to ensure that they are operated and governed effectively. New financing options for councils will be made available, and the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency will provide financing to support water council control organizations that are financially supported by their parent councils. And that's quite important because there is a significant talk about an expanded leverage to borrow money for these organizations. But the critical factor there is that the parent organizations will continue to carry the credit liability from that. So there's no true separation of balance sheet in that respect. The various models anticipated by the legislation is that councils may choose to continue to undertake these services as an internal unit, or a division of the organization, but obviously there need to be ring fencing and clear parameters of transparency in that respect. Councils may set and operate a council-owned water organization, or it may decide to collaborate with other parties and set up a multi-council-owned water organization with other TLAs, or we may have a mixed council and consumer trust owned, or to transfer the whole assets to a consumer trust entity to manage on behalf of the community. These are all options available to the councils. The various timelines are here. You can probably most of you are aware that the critical point where we're at the moment is that the tranche 2 of the legislation was enacted a couple of days ago. And obviously, the phase we are at the moment is that between now and the next 12 months, we have to provide, service delivery plans. Those delivery plans must be undertaken in collaboration with the Department of Internal Affairs. This is anticipated that the delivery plans will be formulated in drafts. They'll be shared with the Department of Internal Affairs. The Department of Internal Affairs has provided some parameters and guidelines as to how it's going to be done, and then an exchange of information and adjustments of delivery plans will be made in order to arrive at within 12 months' time to delivery plan. After the delivery plan has been concluded, and in parallel with that, a number of other considerations could be undertaken with regards to exploring joint ventures or collaboration with other entities and so on. The Council will have until 2028 to demonstrate that it has arrived at a delivery plan and a delivery option that truly reflects the intent of legislation to have a free waters delivered in a manner that meets regulations and standards and also is financially sustainable. So with regards to where we are as a Rotorua Lakes Council, the problems and issues, there are some high-level considerations. One is that, do we meet currently regulatory compliance standards? At the moment, we do. However, it's also important to note that those regulatory standards continue to evolve, and therefore, in structuring a service delivery plan, we need to anticipate or predict as best as we can what these regulatory standards would be and factor it into our delivery plan. Attracting and retaining and developing skills and competence. Again, often there is talk about the scale of the organization, the scale of the facility. It's pivotal to attracting and retaining skills. For Rotorua Lakes Council, we do not have that significant issue at this point in time. We have sufficient scale to be able to do that, but there are always some risks depending on how the market develops. Reliable and cost-effective services provision contracts. Again, if we go back into the long-term plan we have just concluded a couple of months ago, on that basis, we do have reliable and cost-effective services as best as we can benchmark it. But again, in embarking towards a more exhaustive and detailed assessment of delivery plan, we need to interrogate those LTP assumptions in view of the new regulations, and new legislation, and new performance standards, and see whether we still fall within those compliance regime. And obviously, the appropriate and reliable funding sources to satisfy the economic regulator, which includes all the phases, the funding and revenue policies for the services, the borrowing, the debt allowance, and also the cost ratios need to be considered and weighted against the new financial regulations that the legislation anticipates to be required to be complied with. Now, on the basis of our current LTP allocations and funds there, you see in front of you there that, we do have certain parts in our operational expenditure, which obviously will dictate how our Three Waters investment will develop over the life of the long-term plan from 2024 to 2034. The operating expenses, are really covering payments to internal staff, payments to contractors, payments to suppliers, energy supplies, and all these things that cover the operations of the network. And from the year 2024, we will move from $24 million in 2025 to about $31 million in 2034. That's our LTP. Our interest expenses, they will move from $8 million in 2025 to $14 million in 2034. And that's a quite important element to keep in mind because, if increased borrowing needs to happen, obviously those interest expenses will continue to increase in the future. Depreciation in 2025 is about $14 million at this point in time and will move gradually to $23 million in 2034, reflecting the aging of the network, reflecting the introduction of new networks. As you know, we are building a new treatment plant. That needs to be depreciated. We're building new stormwater facilities, detention facilities, and arrangements under our stormwater master plan. And all that capital expenditure will translate into new depreciation and new financial requirements to fund the renewals for these items. The overheads are moving from about $7 million, from $7 million in 2025 to $9 million in 2034. That will reflect, obviously, an enhanced asset value, an enhanced transactional requirement for the organization, but also reflects some of the risks of actually desegregating the Three Waters from the parent organization to some other entity in consideration of what will happen to those such organizational stranded costs or overhead costs. It's not always easy to cut the chief executive organization to about 6 slices and say, the part of these slides will go to Three Waters and part state organization, or a financial services, or computer services, or customer services, and so on. So, there is a risk there in terms of organizational stranded costs, and quite important for us to note those kind of risks. So the total expenses for the Three Waters in terms of our current LTP are moving from $53 million in 2025 to $77 million by 2034, or a 46% increase, which roughly translates about just over 4% per year increase to meet what we currently allow and anticipate to be the demand of those kind of services. Their capital expenditure, you can see there is a significant lumping of our projected capital expenditure on LTP, and that reflects basically the investment in the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant, the possible discharge point, or what we call at the moment a sustainable forest approach. It might not be a forest approach, it might be something different, but that's the discharge point for that kind of investment. Extensions of current unreticulated sewage system to service unreticulated lakeside communities, the stormwater reticulation enhancement to address local flooding, and obviously to give effect to our master plan for stormwater management and to support our future delivery strategy, growth strategy. And obviously we've got water networks expansion for the urban growth areas, which anticipate both water sources management, water networks capacity and resiliency improvements. And you can see over the next year, by 2029, obviously the majority of our upfront investment in capital expenditure happens in that period of time. And that's what I said earlier, that capital expenditure will translate gradually into more operational expenditure, higher depreciation, obviously higher renewal demands, for the all the three services. And again, looking into our long-term plan and doing an assessment on our ratio of our renewals expenditures versus depreciation, you can see there in the various colors. The bottom blue color is the stormwater renewals. The orange color is our wastewater projected renewals, and the gray color is our water supply renewals. The yellow color on the very top of the line, it's the total depreciation anticipated to accumulate from the year 2025 to 2034. As you can see, on the basis of our current our long-term plan, the council's Three Waters depreciation of $193 million for the term of the LTP, and the renewals, and have a renewal allocation of $162 million. So it is anticipated that an economic regulator will require council to fund the difference of $31 million over the next 10 years. So the total blue line on the top of the graphs represents a gap between our depreciation and what we have allocated for renewals, and that gradually will lead to a total of $31 million that would be eventually need to be matched to our depreciation. And again, we've done a high-level assessment of the splits between some key financial indicators of the whole organization versus the Three Waters organization. You can see on the basis of the information we've got currently in front of us, the council's debt sits at a total of $479 million. When you split that debt between the Three Waters and the non-Three Waters parts of the organization, it's $180 million for the Three Waters and $299 million for the non-Waters organization. So we've got a total there over the next 10 years. It's projected for the next 10 years for those numbers to move to $560 million in total, $227 million for the Three Waters and $333 million for the non-Waters. Again, the important element is the bottom line where it goes debt to income ratio. As we stand currently, the Three Waters have a debt to income ratio of 340%, which is above the LGA funding arrangements, and the non-Three Waters debt is 189%. Over the next 10 years, it is projected that the total ratio of debt to revenue for the council to be about 203%, and that comprises 278% for the Three Waters and 171% for the non-council, for the non-Three Waters activities. Again, these are figures extrapolated from the recently approved long-term plan. We really need to go back and do some more work to assess in more detail in light of the new regulations that are anticipated, new resource concerns we will be getting for water supplies, for discharges of our wastewater system, for the stormwater concerns and so on, and then reevaluate that, so within 12 months' time, those ratios can be calibrated as accurately as we can make them, so we can demonstrate how we factor them into our total service delivery plan. Again, at the high level here too, the top red line is it reflects the LGFA limit, with 280%. The black line represents a self-imposed limit of 250%. And when you look at the total council, as a whole, both combined waters and non-waters activities, we remain below the self-imposed limits. But if you take the line of the Three Waters alone, then obviously our debt to revenue ratio exceeds the LGFA limits for the years 2025 to 2029. Again, these are based on our current projections and our current combined services for the whole of the council in totality. And again, when you go through a service delivery plan, we need to disaggregate that and actually ask some pertinent questions as to what are the options and what are the implications of those separations. Again, the service delivery model as outlined earlier, it's, as I said, the council has the option to pursue an internal business unit or a single CCO or multi-council CCOs or mixed council consumer trusts or consumer trust opportunities. Now, I think our advice at this point in time is that there is a lot of talk about assumed advantages of scale through efficiencies, purchasing power, and greater ability to attract staff. There's a lot of talk in the market, and and by various sources along those lines. There are also disbenefits of the scales because, as we talked in the past, a separation of Three Waters from the parent body of local council, it starts introducing suboptimum collaboration or synergies with other activities of the organization. Future development strategy, growth plan, other strategies the council may adopt, relationships with the local communities, direct accountability, and so on. So we need to balance that in due course to make prudent decisions. Now, those benefits are offset by a loss of control and disconnection from other council planning. It's against another school of thought that we need to be considered. Again, in recent times, we have read a lot of documentation about efficiencies of scale from joint ventures and council control organizations. Such efficiencies are untested and largely speculated at this point in time. I've read recently a document, and I would not pinpoint it which the region came through, but they've said that if we band together and form a joint CCO, we'll be saving 1% per year for the next 10 years. And again, 1% is so small that it's well within the margins of error. And I think that we need to be prudent and careful to actually distinguish between a verified fact and a speculative approach to these kind of processes. But however, these are facts we need to consider. The physical service delivery efficiencies through larger joint ventures are less likely for geographically disparate networks. So if we, for example, consider joining with TLA that's 70 kilometers away from our own networks, the physical efficiencies of scale of those networks are not the same as, let's say, Tauranga, Western Bay of Plenty, or Wellington and Lower Hutt, or these areas that really our networks are mixed together. Now, the cost for such joint ventures: structure, overheads, harmonization of systems, monitoring of performance of the CCO, reporting, governance, reflecting local community expectations, and so on, are becoming less and less likely because you start losing that connectivity with your local community. So there is also a risk that if you start considering amalgamations or joint ventures with larger or small communities, larger communities tend to subsidize the smaller communities, and larger communities tend to have a much higher, larger, bigger voice than the smaller communities. These are all subjective considerations that will be factored into in due time. Moving to a regional or larger entity is a big step, both, we believe, politically and operationally, and therefore ring-fencing Three Waters either into a separate business unit or a CCO could provide a transition to that effect if elected members at that point in time deem that to be desirable. So it's quite important to emphasize that by moving forward now to start structuring our delivery plan, will give us a more accurate picture where we're at the moment, both the operational and financial challenges we may face going in the future, and in due course, elected members can make a decision to say, knowing our current position and understanding other TLA's position, then we can do a very objective and evidence-based assessment whether a joint approach to these processes will be beneficial to our communities, both financially and governance-wise, in due course. Again, we want to emphasize that by moving towards a structural delivery plan, it's only a first step that would give us better clarity and crystallize our current position and our projected challenges ahead of us, so we can use it as a benchmark to evaluate potential options of how we deliver those, all those services. High debt opportunities. The LGFA obviously have made some announcements recently that a CCO that is supported by the parent organization could leverage up to 500% of operating revenues, of their operating revenues for debts. Now that is about twice that of existing councils, but of course it's subject to water organizations meeting prudent credit criteria. Now, again, using increased borrowings to solve infrastructure deficits, current and future, is not always a risk-free area, because that debt, we can borrow it, but at some point in time it will accrue financing costs, it will repayment costs. So it might be a short-term, attractive and alluring solution to something, but in the long term, it needs to demonstrate financial sustainability to the regulating authority. The off-balance sheet notion without guarantees is not feasible, so Council will continue to incur the liability and credit rating impacts of such an element. The Councils continue to be the underlying safety net, for those for the credit, rate agencies. So the requirement to achieve financially sustainable models, again, it's, I think the core objective here is to avoid the need for a Council or the Crown to be called to inject additional funds or bail out of a water service provider. The whole scope of the regulation is to say, to deliver these 3 water services at a required level of service and to meet all your statutory requirements, you need to make prudent arrangements so your charges, your fees, your targeted rates, your general rates, and your balance of debt to income ratios has to be prudent and sustainable, so you don't have to run to the parent council or the government to bail you out if you make imprudent decisions. We think that's the core of the intent of the legislation. Now, the most viable path forward, it's to achieve financially sustainable models would appear to be a realistic revenue setting to cover all your operational costs and the projections based on information you've got in front of you, and you can apply that through your water rates, charges, and so on, and to reduce the need to borrow and suppress the debt and revenue ratio. I think it's a prudent approach, but again, structuring the delivery plan and socializing it with the community in due course obviously will give us a good foundation to achieve that sustainability. Now, the provision in these rates and charges can be made, and I'm pretty sure the regulators, financial regulators, will want to see provision to allow for debt servicing and debt levels management. If, for example, the delivery plan eventually to be agreed will set a target debt to revenue ratio, then obviously the regulator will ask to see evidence that within the charges and fees and general rates for the services, there's a provision to service the financial cost, the fiscal cost of debt or borrowings, but also a repayment portion of that to manage the debt at a set limit. So we continue to be enlightened and informed in those requirements by the interaction with the Department of Internal Affairs. They sent yesterday some preliminary guidelines to that effect, but obviously it is anticipated that over the next 12 months we will be doing a lot of interfacing and interaction with the Department of Internal Affairs and the regulatory bodies to make sure we meet those requirements. So what is required today from you is to note the key points of the proposed reforms. I know we went through them very quickly, but if you want us to send you more detailed information, I'm more happy to do that. To know the timeline for the reforms, that's quite an important element. We believe that if you look into a time ahead of us, we have to have a service delivery plan structured and approved by the Department of Internal Affairs within 12 months. Now, it doesn't stop us in parallel with that to explore, to continue to talk about, management options for that. But those management options have to be consulted with the community at some point in time before actually embarking in that direction. Looking into the trienniums, the status of the current triennium, which you will have elections in October next year, it's going to be challenging for this current triennium to embark into meaningful community engagement and make decisions about a potential different delivery model within this triennium, so therefore it's more likely for the next elected body to make these decisions. So we will focus attention in complying with the structure and the population of the delivery plan to satisfy the regulatory and the legislative requirements, with the Department of Internal Affairs. And of course, we report to you regularly. We anticipate every 3 months or so, we give you an update on the status of the delivery plan. But once the delivery plan has been consummated and completed, and the Department of Internal Affairs is satisfied with it, then an important decision will be made at that point in time. Do we go it alone as an in-house business unit? Do we join venture to the CCO? But that will require community consultation, which will seem to fall under at the end of this triennium for the next triennium that will be after the elections. Again, gave you on the basis of a long-term plan decisions have been made recently. The current status of Rotorua Lakes Council's position in terms of three waters. Our advice is that that is done on the basis of a complete and interrelated service within the larger organization. If the legislation requires us to clearly separate the three waters and crystallize boundaries around it, we need to be cognizant of emerging regulations, financial regulations, levels of service, standards for discharges, standards for drinking water standards, and stormwater standards, and so on. And we need to ask ourselves, do we need to include something more than we have included in the LTP at this point in time? So that's a prudent approach, we believe, to progress forward. So finally, we'd like you to request for you to endorse that we start formulating our own water services delivery plan. We have allocated some funds from our Better Off funding that has been provided to us, to support some external support to make sure we are consistent with the Department of Internal Affairs requirements, and also consistent with other TLAs. So every council does not develop a unique and different delivery plan from other TLAs. So we start working in that direction, and we report back to you on a regular level as to where we are, what it looks like, and at what point in time decisions have to be made as to the final model of delivery plan. So thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Ross, for all that information to help us understand the situation. And I believe the CE might like to add some additional comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. If I can try and summarise that very comprehensive presentation, there's a whole lot of uncertainty. There's a whole lot of models out there. What we're seeking your endorsement of is that we are preparing the plan to deliver on our own. We believe that that's sustainable and the right solution for our community. We're going to work through that in the provisions of the legislation and keep you updated as we go. One other thing I'd add is the legislation has a strange bit of wording which doesn't occur very often, which requires the plan to be certified as being accurate and complete by the Chief Executive, and that's quite unusual language in the Act. So rest assured I'll be keeping a very close eye on what's being developed, and we'll be bringing that to you for your close review as we progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. And with all that information, I'd just like to ask if anyone's got any questions for Stavros. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that great report, Stavros. Did answer a few of my questions, but I do have a number. Just going back for clarification, going back to that slide that you had, service delivery models, there were the two top options, and the second one, which I believe was like us forming a single council-owned water organisation. Yep. So in our report, that particular item 2 doesn't show increased debt leverage, and yet that slide does. So does option 2 actually have that, just to be sure?
Yes, it does.
It does.
And the precondition for that is that, if it is supported by the parent organisation. So
yes,
there's a council-owned CCO. It would not be seen in terms of debt leverage and credit rating separate from the council. So if the council warranties it, we can increase the debt ratio to that. Yeah.
subsequent question on that. So, and yet on page 24 it says the local government funding agency will treat borrowing by water organisations separate from borrowing by their parent councils. So you mentioned that it's not going to show up, or that it's not, we can't get away from having that on our balance sheet. Is that true? Because the minister seemed to indicate that that was the case.
My understanding, Councillor Patterson, and Thomas might be much better, more informed person to say that, is that the LGFA will lend money to the CCO, but the credit rating will not consider that to be a separate, item.
Thank you, Thomas. If you could add some detail there too.
Thank you. I'll just go back a little bit to explain how it currently works. So a CCO can borrow from the LGFA. And to do so, currently it needs the support of council, and it's normally done through a method of issuing new shares but not calling them up, and so that provides an element of security. So that's how the current regime works, and so from the council perspective, the debt doesn't sit on our books, it sits on the CCO books, but at any time if the CCO isn't able to pay its debts, it can call up those shares that have been issued, and therefore it would require council to buy those shares. And so council therefore recognises that contingent liability, if I was to call it, or potential liability. So that's how it currently works. And if the CCO is, which most of them are, stand on their own 2 feet and are able to service that debt, from a credit rating perspective, while credit agencies look at the wider council group, when they issue their credit rating to the council, which is the parent entity, they generally don't include it into the mix because it's for the parent entity, but they do look at all those sort of aspects. So going forward, that is effectively similar to what they're doing, and so the entity can borrow up. And I think just the little bit of the gap that the LGFA and the government needs to close is around that support or security from council. My understanding is they're looking at having a similar mechanism to councils with regards to securing debt against the revenues of the CCO. So therefore it would break that link between the need to have issued and uncalled capital. And these are the things that the LGFA and the government need to work through. But if it didn't, it would still be similar with regards to the CCO would be able to borrow at a much higher level than what council would do. I hope that provided the answer.
Pretty much. Cool. Thank you very much. Just a couple more, if you wouldn't mind. Just with regards to the model itself. I think I recall you saying at a couple of meetings that when we're talking about recouping the costs and making sure that we can service our debt levels, that in the current climate, that it would not, and I'm not advocating for this, by the way, in the current climate, putting water meters on the rest of the city, the urban area, is just not feasible. We wouldn't get the returns on it for the outlay. With this model, would that be more likely?
Thank you. One of the intent of the delivery plan is to say what we do at the moment and to project some possible improvements, changes going forward. Water meters, in my personal opinion, professional opinion, it's a very good tool to achieve a whole range of monitoring and distribution of costs, and so on. In terms of actually achieving other outcomes, it obviously incurs significant upfront capital costs. But again, that's a conversation that it's possible to be attained. But those water meters will translate both into operational costs in terms of depreciation and maintenance and administration, and that's a conversation we have with the community in due course. If we explain the rationale why we have meters, you can potentially invest into water meters, and the costs of that investment will translate into increased fees and charges to be recovered through water meter, volumetric metering. But that's the whole idea behind the service plan, to identify possible paths forward. But those paths forwards are not really cost-free. you can borrow the money to do it. That will come back into your depreciation and your operational costs, and it would translate into your fees and charges and the distribution of those costs in a more, let's say, evidence-based approach. So I'm not excluding anything. All I'm saying, I've got a view about it, but at the end of the day, it's a view of the elected members that matters, and the view of the community that matters, and the key objectives is going to set forward. The financial implications of that matters to be considered by the community and weighted against the pros and cons of that approach.
Thank you for clarifying that. And my last question relates to, again, I think you've mentioned a couple of times that the state of our pipes under the ground, that a big chunk of them are already past their use-by date, that accessing these kind of funds could help us speed that process up. Would it be correct that if we were speeding up our process of replacing those pipes that need replacing and adding in new infrastructure to allow us to complete our FDS aspirations, would the standalone CCO option, giving us access to extra funds, allow that to happen quicker?
Two questions for that, two void points for that, and Thomas can sort of help me in that direction there too. Yes, we do have an aging infrastructure. However, we have structured infrastructure strategy and a financial strategy and a long-term plan, cognizant of that, and we have made provisions which I think is reasonable in redressing that historical issue. And you would notice over the next 10 years we're investing our renewals pretty close to our depreciation levels. So we're making progress in that direction. There is a gap that develops over the next 10 years, would be up to $3 million, say, but $3 million into our depreciation, if you spread it out over 10 years, is doable to match your depreciation of your renewals, okay? So in that respect, it's, I think we already made provisions for that and heading that kind of direction. I think the biggest unknown in that respect is more about what the new regulatory impositions might be onto us to monitor the performance of the networks in view of the fact that it is an aging network, and that would be an operational element cost to be done. Now, if you want to accelerate renewals, obviously you don't use borrowings to do renewals. You need to get renewals from your fees and charges because it's an operational cost. You only borrow money to build new assets, like upgrade a treatment plant or a new reservoir or things like that. And again, it's my view, my advice to you is that the use of debt should be used very prudently and has to be in balance with what, how your charges are, because otherwise you run the risk of having a large debt in order to keep your operational fees and charges low, but eventually that debt is going to catch up with you. So, but again, these are professional views, and Chief Financial Officer might have something to add to that. But, as I said, elected members, the current, the future elected members are in charge of making policy, revenue decisions, and obviously were our advice. But ultimately, these are balancing decisions, elected members, should and are entitled to make. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. So you would like to add some comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So I think there's a couple of interesting bits of conversation there. The first one, I think, the chart that you saw around the gap between the depreciation of our assets and our expenditure on renewals. That's something that's quite possible the economic regulator will look at and require us to address. So in terms of the sustainable funding of water services, that's something I would expect we might need to look at and advise you to review as time goes by, because I'm not confident that an economic regulator would look at that and say that that's acceptable. The second thing I'd fully reinforce is that absolutely the operational costs need to support water services entity in a water services delivery in a ring-fenced manner, and that's the whole objective of this legislation. So if you looked at those ratios and those numbers, the economic regulator might look at us and say, well, now that you've ring-fenced water, we can see that your water charges, total water charges, maybe need to be raised to keep up with your water expenditure. Now, and there are ways of resolving that by either reducing your expenditure or raising your revenue. And that's where possibly the discussion about meters might come in. But that's all discussion for a later date once the economic regulator comes into play. I guess I just wanted to highlight to you all that those are the sort of discussions we would anticipate going into a much more regulated environment.
Thank you for those comments. Is there anything further you'd like to add? Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair, thank you very much, Stavros and your team, for your very comprehensive and very helpful report. Two quick questions. Could I ask, I'm familiar with the model of water care in Auckland and the joint council collaboration in Wellington, which I'm sure you know quite a bit about. Are there any examples of a consumer trust currently?
Not that I'm aware of, Councillor O'Brien. I don't, so we need to explore that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Could I also ask, as far as the independence, and sorry, I'm going to ask for in an area which you may not be able to give me assistance here with, but your personal understanding of the legislation as far as an independence of a CCO. So our current CCOs, they have expenditure limits and then they come to us if they require substantial expenditure, I believe. How independent would a free water body be compared to a normal CCO? So if I could follow up to give you an example, if a CCO was in existence and they decided to bring in water meters, would they have to seek council's permission, one for the expenditure but also for that option, or are they more independent than a normal CCO would be?
Well, I will speculate here rather than give you an accurate response. At the end of the day, if an independent CCO was established to administer and provide the free water services, it would be their responsibility to evaluate how do they arrive at the decision what to charge. And it also would be entirely their decision to decide what tools to use, how to decide that. And water meter is one of those tools, to do it. I don't think that they will require the council's permission to do that, although good, prudent relationship management would say, we propose to do that, what do you think, okay? But in terms of transparency and accountability, I imagine if the CCO was of that mind to install water meters, as an example, as you use it, unless they're able to do it on their initiative and justify it, because they can say, for us to manage those water services, we need those tools, we need those meters to be in place, and therefore it's our decision because we are accountable for that. That's how I see it, but that's my view.
Thank you.
If I might add through you, Madam Chair, really good examples of water care and Wellington Water. So one of the key distinctions I understand through the briefings I've had on this legislation is that in order to meet the threshold for an independent CCO, the power to charge for water would not sit with council anymore. It would need to move to the CCO, and that is materially different from how Wellington Water works. So Wellington Water gets its funding from the 4 or 5 councils. And that is not going to be an acceptable model for an independent CCO, because an independent CCO is going to have its revenue to its debt at that 500% ratio. So for it to have debt, it needs to secure its revenue, and that revenue needs to be independent of council decision making. So without being able to answer specifically on water meters, my understanding is that the ability to control revenue must go with the CCO if it is to achieve those higher leverage ratios.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I just have a subsequent question? So could I ask, as far as and I thank you for your answer on that, so could I ask, as far as a development contribution, so the money, if we had a CCO, the income that we take on that, could then the CCO decide to raise fees again without our... I mean, this sounds a little bit frightening, to be truthfully honest.
I think just following on and supporting the Chief Executive, their ability to rate, they would also transfer over the ability to charge development contributions. And so Council would be completely removed from any funding mechanisms that CCO would undertake.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I suppose just to reinforce my comments earlier, there are some benefits and there are some risks in setting independent organizations. And the risk is you have to start getting disjointed strategic decision-making for the district, for an area, because the CCO will have a focus on certain things and that might not always be consistent with the council's strategic objectives. So these are risks to be considered and we will be considered in due time.
Thank you, everybody. Are there any further questions? Yes, Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you. I just, in the decision making, what conversations have occurred, if any, with Bay of Plenty Regional Council or any of the other councils within the Bay around the potential for co-design of these systems? I just note that in the Waikato Regional Council have highlighted their interest in being involved in a multi-council owned water organisation over there, because they've highlighted they've got assets, technology and expertise that would be useful in the co-design. I just wonder what type of conversations have occurred with other councils or with Bay of Plenty Regional Council before a decision was made to just have or go our own, essentially.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll ask the CE to respond to that.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Madam Chair. Look, there are conversations are ongoing. We are looking at, the Bay of Plenty CEs are also observing what's happening in the Waikato. We're in connection with what's happening there. They're responding to slightly different pressures than we are, and the conversation in the Bay of Plenty has been much more about understanding what the opportunities are through this legislation, but we're not sensing a need to react into a collaborative model definitively as a result of our individual situations. So this conversation and your decision here is going to help inform our position in those discussions, and that is primarily if we think a viable starting point is we do our own thing as we are discussing here, then absolutely that doesn't stop any further discussions about collaboration, but it gives us a basis that's endorsed by the governors from which to start any discussions about understanding shared and additional value that we can gain. So we're aware of those discussions. We're trying to understand what we can learn from them, but our recommendation, our understanding of our council situation is this is a good starting point, and that's what we're seeking your endorsement of today.
Sorry, just to add to that, I see that in the Waikato Council, participation in the first stage of that process is non-binding, and I just think it's worth looking into. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Kiriopa. Are there any further questions? Yes, Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te chairman. Kia ora kōrua. Thank you for the report, Stavros. Very a lot of depth there and a lot to download. Just wanted to ask the question in terms of the Three Waters reform that we're talking about now. What difference, if any, or what are the differences between what was proposed from the former government and what's proposed here? Are you able to articulate the main changes?
Well, thank you, Councillor Wara. I think the main changes are the previous reforms had a distinct objective to take assets supporting Three Water Service away from the councils and to vest them or reallocate them into large regional entities. And they set up a whole system of governance structure behind that was different to what local councils enjoy at the moment or undertake at this point in time. So that was the major difference. Large entities representing, for example, in our area, NTDB had a population of 800,000 people, brought them all together, put a new governance board and say, okay, you are responsible for Three Waters. This legislation says to councils, you have options now. You can choose to do do it yourself. You can choose to set up a CCO. You can choose to joint venture with other people. You can choose to explore other sort of mechanisms, but it's your decision. Their requirements, legislative requirements, are the demand to see financial sustainability for three water services, and the underlying reason for that is that there is a picture around the whole country that investment in underground infrastructure over the last 40, 50, 60 years has not been sufficient to keep pace, with new requirements. So that's a big difference for that. So it's in terms of the governance and the compulsion to do something versus to choose to do something different. It is a choice. This legislation gives councils choices within a regulated framework.
Kapai, thank you. I just have another patai tū e te tiamana. Just in terms of the, we've talked about a little bit the ability to draw on debt to fund these things, and obviously you've already mentioned we've got to pay it back somehow. Are there any particular payback plans that are being spoken about in terms of stretching it out over a longer term than what we're currently able to do now, or something like that? Because it's nice to borrow that much, but it also, like you said, got to pay it back somehow. So I'm just wondering, are there any tools or something like that available that are being spoken about now?
Yeah, because I'm an engineer, I will ask my Chief Financial Officer to answer that question.
Not that we're aware of. The LGFA does have limits with regards to its length that you can borrow from, but in saying that, ourselves, we have paybacks that are longer than that. And so I would assume the entity would do very similar to any other entity, looking at the life of the asset that it's borrowing against, what it's looking to achieve, and would structure its borrowings in a way that it's repaid over the life of that asset and getting a return on it. You wouldn't want to still have borrowings attached to an asset that it's come at the end of the life. So that's, I would say, normal, prudent management that CCOs would follow.
If I can just add, if you recall the chart with all the numbers on it, which is a reflection of the LTP you just adopted, is all of those ratios show lower debt to revenue ratios at the end of the 10 years than at the start. So effectively that reflects the payback plan we already have for the large hump of debt that we're about to get into and then get over. So we're already doing that. I will also point out that was a comment made by Audit New Zealand, is that we are prudent with our debt. Our financial strategy shows that we are depreciating assets and replacing them within the term of the borrowings associated with that asset. So all good, responsible, prudent stuff.
Kapai, thank you. Andrew, thank you for that kōrero too, Thomas. It's one thing I think we need to really look at, because some of the numbers, they're assumed numbers, and you never know what's going to pop out of the woodwork, or out of the ground rather. And these are the reason I'm asking the questions to. But I think, I'll put it in my simple terms anyway. I think you've assured us that there's enough fat in there to be confident to move forward. But we've got to anyway. So. And my last question was just around the one of the slides there, the loss of kōrero with mana whenua, that given the situation here is probably a bit different to a lot of other places in Aotearoa, where the sources of water, which we're going to get a presentation on today, and other iwi owned and joint consents and things like that, even where our wastewater is, treatment plant is, and even where the wastewater is going to. These are all iwi bound. So I find that sort of comment in that slide a little bit hard to swallow, that there will be loss of, I mean, we're not doing that, but the other option, that's what I'm talking about, is not that. Do you think what's been put forward now is going to improve those the current situation we're in? I'm not saying it's a bad situation, but do you think it will work the other way?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, my view is that the proposed situation gives us the best opportunity to realise those aspirations for mana whenua in Aotearoa and for the... Yeah, so I think, as you said, this is a commentary on some of the other larger amalgamated models, and that's a comment that came up and down the country in response to the consultation on the previous proposal, where we were talking about larger bodies with larger boundaries. So that's purely a reflection of that. As I said, my view is that the proposed arrangements give us the best opportunity to engage meaningfully with mana whenua and for the benefit of all of Rotorua.
Kapai, thank you. Kia ora te tiamana.
Kia ora. Councillor O'Brien, you have another question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for you, and thank you for your leniency. Could I just ask, again, sorry, Stavros, to put your future glasses on, under a corporate model or a multi-council model, who would apply for the resource consents? Would it be the corporate entity?
Correct.
It would be, thank you. And secondly, I'd just like to say that I fully support the concerns expressed by Councillor Waru about a corporate or multi-council. Any dilution of the voice of Te Ara would be of great concern to me. So for me, it's another reason for us to support the suggested model at this time. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further questions? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you once again for your leniency. Just one that popped into my head talking about the impact down the track. If we chose to go, let's say, for example, a single council-owned water organisation instead of retaining it in-house or any of the others, given the current situation with the Tarawera scheme and where that's heading, and the financial costs have yet to be determined for the individual landowners, if we were to transfer this to a different organisation, would they be able to alter that again?
There's a bunch of ifs and maybes in there, but I'll try and answer it, and that would be to say is if we ever went down the path of setting up a single council-controlled water organisation as outlined there, the terms of that transfer of debt, projects, revenue power, all of that would need to be carefully addressed at that time. So I would expect that matters of retrospective charging, etc., are addressed if and when we get to that point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Is there any further questions? There appears to be none, so I'd just like to thank Stavros and Thomas and CE for their comments and additional information on this issue. I'd like now to move to what has been recommended to us on this matter. The recommendation is that the Infrastructure and Environment Committee notes the Rotorua Lakes Council are proceeding on the basis that the draft water services delivery plan be prepared based on retaining in-house delivery as its preferred service delivery model. Now, and Councillor O'Brien is happy to move that, and Councillor Waru is happy to second. Based on that, I will open up for discussion. Would the mover like to make any comments? Or?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've already had a good run with the questions. I'll allow other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion points, councillors? Yes, Councillor Kiriopa and then Matt Tapsell.
Thanks. I don't feel particularly strongly either way, but I do have a. I'd just like to highlight that iwi have been saying for a long time that we need to be looking at catchments-based approaches for our for the Te Mana o Te Wai essentially, because all of our waterways are connected. And so I wouldn't cancel out working with other councils. Personally, I think it's still worth having a look at. And in terms of Rotorua Lakes Council maintaining control is going to be better for mana whenua, like I haven't seen that. So I don't think that that's an argument. I think if iwi were going to engage in these things, whether we do it solely as Te Arawa or whether we do it with our whananga who are within the catchments of our waterways. We're still going to have the same issues. It's about whether or not councils engage appropriately. So just highlighting those two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Tapsell?
Thank you very much. I'm very supportive of retaining this in-house, and I just want to acknowledge that the reason why this is a recommendation is that Rotorua is in a really good position, much better than other councils around the country that are in significant need of further investment to not only maintain and renew, but also to be able to invest in the required water infrastructure. We can see that this council is putting significant investment in the next few years, which will be beneficial not only for our current population and the growth of our population, but also, of course, for protecting the environment. And so I do also want to support the comment by the Chief Executive that Audit New Zealand have already signalled that Rotorua's financial plan is prudent, which of course is one of the key concerns around why we may look at other models to ensure that we can finance the necessary investment. So finally, I do just want to say that at some future time, it would be great to have some form of consultation before we land on a final delivery plan. We have already heard very strongly from our community when Three Waters discussion began, the strong desire to keep our decision making local, and of course that means that we're able to make decisions on how much this will ultimately cost for our people too. So I do want to acknowledge Councillor Waru's comments about Rotorua being unique in terms of the land of which our water asset sits on and the requirement for meaningful engagement with the iwi too. I know that was certainly a concern when amalgamation was first discussed, where we were faced with massive entities that encompassed a number of different regions all the way to Taranaki, and it just did not make sense for us here locally in Rotorua. So I'm really happy that we are in a situation where we are able to move forward in a way that's best for Rotorua by Rotorua. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. I'll move to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Stavros, for your report. It sets out the options that are available to us under the new government's legislative changes. I'm comfortable that the particular option that's been recommended is the one that fits best for Rotorua and is in the best interests of the community. It involves least disruption to the current arrangements, which, as Mayor Tapsell stated, we're doing a pretty reasonable job as compared to some other councils. So, yes, I will be supporting this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anybody? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, while I agree with most of the comments so far, one thing that does concern me is the option 2, the idea of having a commercial entity virtually controlling our water supplies. That concerns me, especially with the tension between trying to make sure that our people can afford our water versus everything else that's going on in their lives. I certainly wouldn't want to be a contributor to that, adding more stress to their lives when our water is one thing that we can take pride in, as Mayor Tapsell's rightly pointed out, that it is the current best in the country, without a doubt, and it doesn't need too much tweaking to keep it that way. However, I would tautoko Councillor Kiriopa's comments that collaboration may be something we should think about in all of catchment scheme, because we're still having issues with how do we get the water down the Kaituna, because those people don't want us to open the gates in the Kaituna, yet we have to. You know, there's not enough cooperation and collaboration when it comes to managing our assets. So I think that's something else that we should keep separate from this discussion, but something that could be looked at in the future. But I do support this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Waru?
Tēnā koe te te amana o tira, I'll keep my comments brief. I think if we listened at the start of the conversation of the kōrero, that this is just a step 1 to the potential plans that could come from the service delivery plan. I don't think it cuts off any ability for us to collaborate in a meaningful way moving forward. If that's what we so wish to do, we can do that. So I don't think this cuts off, from my point of view anyway, I don't think this cuts off that ability to do that. Secondly, I think, we've talked about a lot of financial sustainability or financially sustainable models. So I'd like us to also remember, something around the environmentally sustainable model as well. So we need to look after our weight, also look after the whenua, and it'll look after us. So this is just a little bit of a reminder, kia tātou. I'll be supporting, obviously I've seconded the kaupapa, so kia kaha tātou. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Did you want to make any closing comments as the mover, Councillor O'Brien?
No, I think we've exhausted the main arguments, both sides, Madam Chair, so in the interest of time, I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would, in that case, put this motion that is in front of us to the vote. I'll ask all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against? And that is carried. Thank you. Just looking at the time, councillors, and what we've got left in front of us, rather than begin the progress report, my suggestion is that perhaps we have a break, if that's okay, for 15 minutes. So we'll come back at about 11, beg your pardon. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. To item 7.2 of which is the Infrastructure and Environment Progress Report. That's on page 37 of your agendas, councillors. I'd like to ask for a mover and a seconder that the report Infrastructure and Environment Progress Report be received. Councillor Kai Fong and seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. And I invite Stavros to overview his report and maybe highlight anything he thinks we need to know. Thank you. In your hands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elected members, I'll take the report as read. I'm happy to respond to any questions. I've got 3 or 4 pertinent points I think I would like to make some comments on, and again, happy to take any questions arising from these key points. One is the progression of the Tarawera sewage reticulation scheme. As a lot of members or all of you are aware, the scheme is progressing towards its 90th percentile completion for stage 1. In recent days, we have had to navigate carefully some grounds with regards to our relationship with the Board of Control for Lake Rotorua and the protests that arose from the area. And so a brief statement as to where we are in that respect. I want to start by stating some core objective which I believe, and the record will verify, that we all agree to. The ongoing contamination or pollution of Lake Tarawera through the seepage of septic tanks, untreated wastewater into the lake is unacceptable to all. That is a common objective that we, community, and all our partners agree to it. The scheme was in response to actually alleviating that Lake Tarawera risk and the community's health risk. Obviously, we're cognizant of and aware on the views of the Lake Rotorua Board of Control views about the laying of a pipe on the legal roads traversing Lake Rotorua. We, in the interest of goodwill and good relationship management, we have agreed to pause physical works for a period of time to allow all parties to have a meaningful conversation and correro to identify how we move forward in that respect, to try to minimize any points of tension and to maintain good community relationships. This is where we are at the moment, and we are engaging with our partners to find a way to progress that mahi. Within, again, the Tarawera residents community group, there is another issue that is evolving at the moment, especially as we're progressing through stage 2 of the project, which is the on-property installation of grinder pumps. As you're aware, over the last 2 years or so, we have undertaken at least 4 formal community consultation processes with Lake Tarawera. We have a significant number of responses, and we are progressing in that direction. And to that effect, this council has agreed in January this year to engage with the contracts for stage 2 implementation. It is unfortunate at this point in time that a segment of that community have adopted a position where they would like to apply pressure on the council to prematurely commit to provide more funding and assurances of the capping of the costs to them for that scheme by actually frustrating the stage 2 process. They're advising residents not to sign the locality plan for the location of those facilities on property until council has agreed to that funding assistance, as they see it. We have told them, myself and my chief executive, that council is not in a position at this point in time to make that commitment, because we really focus on two things: to complete the project as soon as possible, to compress the cost to the lowest possible level, and council maintains an open mind in due course to assess the total cost of the project and consider its funding and revenue policy assigning with that. A large number and some numbers of people are already agreeing to locality plans, and will consider how to progress with that. I would like to give you elected members a heads up that in due course, perhaps around November, I will revert back to this elected body and seek your guidance as to how to approach it. It is possible that those parties who have agreed for the installation on the locality plans to proceed as planned, but it's also possible for those parties who are actually trying to frustrate the projects, the progress, for us to apply a possible regulatory leverage in that respect. So I would leave it at that at this point in time until we make further progress to address both our relationship and progress with the Board of Control for Lake Rotorua, and also to see over the next couple of months the progress we're making in terms of getting agreements by property owners for the installation and building consents for those facilities on property. That's one. And as I said, I can either respond to questions on this now, or I will just continue some of my points, and and then we can take questions after that. Is that okay? All right. Rotorua, some of you, I think most of you are aware that we are in ongoing negotiations with the Minister for the Environment with regards to the reallocation of $10 million funding to Rotorua from unspent funds residing at this point in time within the Crown, in Crown's hands, that was dedicated to land incentives programs. We had agreed to the draft terms of reference for an independent review on behalf of the Minister for that project to identify and explain the causal factors for the variation between the initial estimate of the project in 2014 and the actual cost of the project. I have exchanged information with the officers of the Ministry of the Environment, and I have provided information pertinent to setting those terms of reference. It was my expectation, initially agreed, that those will be completed by the 16th of September. Yesterday, I received another update, and those timeframes are shifting further into early October at this point in time. Having said that, our position is quite clear. We're quite open to collaborate with any independent terms of reference or review, of that variance of the projects. What I'm trying to emphasize to the Minister and the Minister's officers is that under the deed agreement of 2005, parties have obligations. And one of the obligations falling onto the Crown is to respond to requests from the strategy group in an expeditious and effective and efficient way. It is our view that 4 years after we have raised that issue with a strategy group with the Minister, continue to undertake these processes does not appear to be expeditious. But having said that, it does not mean that we are not open to collaborate in a transparent way to all the questions or inquiries or investigations they want to undertake. And I do hope that we conclude this matter within early October so the funds can be transferred to the Rotorua Lakes Council and close that matter. So that is where we are with that in that respect. Fluoridation, I'm aware again that some discussions are taking around the fluoridation proposal. Again, as my Chief Executive articulated many times, the resolutions made by the Council in June, I believe, this year, had two key objectives. One, to protect the ratepayers from a capital cost to comply with the directive, and two, to prepare the organisation to have the systems into place via contracts. So when we are ready to activate those systems, we are ready to do so to avoid any penalties accruing by not complying with the timeframes. Again, I will reiterate here that what I've said many times, we are in the process of giving effect to that systems implementation. However, the activation of the fluoridation system will not take place until we come back to you around about February next year and advise you that we have completed the physical installation of the systems, we have explored and assessed any legal impediments or other considerations, and we see no impediment, or we see impediment to activate or not activate. So that is where we are at this point in time, and I think we give effect to the relevant resolutions you have provided for us. Transports. Over the last couple of months, the National Land Transport Funding Program and the Board of Directors or NZTA have been engaged into making decisions about the local and regional funding allocations of various transport programs. It's yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, Her Worship the Mayor and the Chief Executive received advice from the NZTA Board and Chief Executive, I think, and the Minister to that effect that those deliberations have concluded by the Board and NZTA. There are two issues arising from these deliberations and decisions. One, there is absolutely zero investment into state highway improvements into Rotorua district. We have identified through the Regional Land Transport Committee in our individual conversations with the NZTA senior officers. Her Worship the Mayor wrote a clear letter, I believe, to the Minister and the Chief Executive of NZTA articulating Rotorua's Lakes expectations in terms of 5 priorities for the state highways. An unfortunate decision we saw yesterday identifies that no funding to any state highway improvement projects in Rotorua has been allocated for 24 to 27. Second thing is that there were 3 tranches of funding allocated to Rotorua's roading transport network. One is got general operations and maintenance programs. One was, the next tranche came in early August with regards to safety education programs. And last night, they made a decision onto what we call a cluster of activities under the name minor safety improvements. The initial safety education and public transport education programs in August only gave us 1/3 of the funding requested in the National Land Transport Fund. And the funding we requested for minor safety improvements, including public, bus shelters and things like that, public transport, we got 0. Now, this is not unique to Rotorua. The government's policy statement seems to be focused on to maintaining roads and highways of national significance and other activities and moving away from walking, cycling, public transport and safety improvement projects. So we do have a bit of a challenge together with my officers. I will analyze it in more detail and come back to you next month with some reprioritization of work, because without the National Land Transport funding support, the 57% funding allocation, we have only what we have allocated in our local LTP, the local share, which basically is about 40% of what we require to do in those areas of safety, minor safety improvements, no speed limits, no pedestrian crossings, no walking, cycling, those areas. So we have to manage very carefully how we use our limited local share and reprioritize our works in order to stay as far as we can within the envelope of funding allocation from our long-term plan. So that's where we're at the moment, and I expect that probably will raise some concerns with relevant authorities with regards to the state highways, which I think it's unfortunate that no investment has been targeted, for the state highways in the district, and obviously that's a piece of work we need to do together in the Regional Land Transport Committee and within the Minister and other authorities as we see appropriate. So these are the main areas I had in my report, but more than happy to respond to any questions related to that or any element within the progress report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stavros, for your report and the additional items that you've filled us in on. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you for your report, Stavros. Just love good news. Page 35, talking about funding, the Eastgate intersection improvements in detailed design. Who's funding that?
At the moment, it sits with our funding under our transport capital expenditure. We have allocated funding to support local growth, and we have funding over the next 2-3 years allocated to that activity. But I have requested for NZTA that they have made a commitment to us back in 2016 that once a solution or interim solution has been identified, NZTA will be open to consider their funding contribution in line with the assessed safety benefits to be accrued. I have not had an answer yet, but I'm working in that kind of direction, and I will report to you in due course.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we're paying, so basically it's us that's funding for that. So if NZTA say, no, we're not going to support you on this at all, will everything just come to a halt?
My view is no, because for two reasons. One is that in 2002, and I know it's well before this triennium, when the Eastgate development was approved to develop, the developer made a financial contribution to council, and from memory was in the region of almost $300,000, with the expectations that once the development reaches full capacity and traffic volumes entering and exiting on Eastgate development, council will investigate an intersection improvement. At that point in time was in the form of a roundabout, because the current cost of a roundabout to meet NZTA safety expectations would estimate it costs about $10 million, and we haven't got that money. So that's why I'm exploring an interim low-cost solution with traffic signals, and I think that we have a duty or obligation to fulfill a commitment this council has made in 2002. In parallel with that, of course, we've got a consideration of how the airport business plan is developing, and obviously we have to make an allowance to enable that development to take place. And I believe that once you go to detailed design fully committed and go to tenders and get some market costs for that, I'll come back to you, with the options and the recommendations, and eventually, because it's your jurisdiction to make decisions on allocating capital funding, then we can consider that point in time. But my view is that this organization has made commitments on more than 20 years ago, and I think at some point in time we have to give effect to those commitments.
Thank you for that. So just to confirm, the roundabout option was 10 million, potentially. What would the traffic light option be?
The most recent cost estimate is between $1.2 and $1.6 million.
Right, thank you for that. And this is a couple of different pages, if I can move on to those. Page 48, the landfill, we talk about the landfill, refuse and recycling collections. There was something that I spied recently released, which made me think about that tyre mountain that we have up at the landfill. Are we part of the newly announced TyreWise scheme that was announced by Minister Penny Simmons?
We're not part of it, but we will work with them to take advantage of that. The tyre stockpile in the landfill is a legacy thing. It's been there since when we were operating the landfill in our own ways. Those tyres need to be removed from the landfill to go somewhere, and this scheme has been announced recently. It makes it more viable at a national level, because every council was trying to do its own thing. Now it's a national scheme, and obviously it will be advantageous for us to work in that respect. I don't have the full details of that, but yes, my answer is that we will work in that direction.
Excellent, and we will be establishing our own area collection points, I guess you could say, for people to take up to, I think the limit is 5 tyres per day.
I think so, yeah.
Fantastic. And lastly, one more question. I see on page 51 about sports fields, SSDM have been contracted to design sports fields at Titoki Place and Rayboard Park. Then it goes on to say field construction from early to mid-2025. I don't see Rob here, but do you know what clubs have been approached and which ones will be using that facility once it's up and running?
Sorry, Councillor Patterson, I don't have that information readily available in hand, but the implementation period is correct, as we design, but I will ask Rob to get back to you with some more detailed information. I imagine and I expect that when we do these works, we talk to the relevant sports clubs, who are actually stakeholders in that process. But I can't give you the answer off my head at the moment.
And I guess that leads into the PARs. So when can we expect to see that?
Well, we've got a workshop scheduled, I believe, in October, and the workshop will will walk you through or talk with you, not to you, not with you, the strategic objectives of the PARs. And if you're happy with that, with a strategic objective, then we start developing a program of works to be implemented consider with an XLTP.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Wing, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just this first one. Thanks, Stavros, for the report and for your previous explanations around the local water done well as well. Just continuing on with the transport discussion, in your view, I guess it's probably part of a wider conversation, but how large of a risk is it that Rotorua seems to keep missing out on the support and the funding from the National Land Transport funding towards our very important, significant infrastructure or transport projects like Nongataha, like Eastgate, very important connectors in our community. I guess, in your view, how large of a risk is it to our growth, to our housing, to our economic development as a city, as a district, that we're not getting this funding, and in examples like Eastgate, where we're having to fund it ourselves?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wong. I think, my personal opinion is that we are actually into an unfortunate situation at the moment. We run a very high risk of being sidelined by larger, centres, population centres. I think Her Worship the Mayor made a very strong point to the Minister and the Chair of the Board of Directors for the NZTA in her letter, reminding them that in 2016, when this Council agreed to help NZTA alleviate their liabilities for constructing the Rotorua Eastern Arterial route by lifting the designation of that route, was only made on the basis of the undertaking that this Council was given, that NZTA and the Crown, of course, will continue to do progressive investment in the state highway network in our district. And the state highways are really our arterial routes. If you look at it, that's where our residential and industrial and conveyance and visitor, corridors are. And if we continue to be sidelined, in favour of other major population centres, and again, I'll reiterate, the funding allocated by NZTA in terms of state highway improvements and state roads of national significance overwhelmingly favours centres like Tauranga and Western Bay and those areas. And I think it's incumbent upon us collectively to continue to raise these issues at any given opportunity through the Regional Land Transport Committee, through the Minister, through the NZTA, through our political channels, to make sure that Rotorua doesn't fall behind. Because without having our arterial routes to be fit for purpose, then it frustrates a lot of our other future economic development strategies. That's my view.
Thank you, Stavros. And I think the CE has something to add as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I've also spent a bit of time this morning on the phone trying to unpick and understand some of the interpretations of this data, which I'm sure you'll appreciate are very, very fresh at the moment. I'd say that there are two things to consider that are somewhat separate. One is the effectiveness of our ability to have Rotorua's priorities reflected in the regional land transport plan. And the 5 projects that we talked about, there was an opportunity to to get attention to those. And as Stavros mentioned, the Mayor and the Chamber of Commerce and Rotorua NZ also advocated to the Minister and the Chair of NZTA on the basis of. The other factor, though, is the flavour of the GPS and what the emphasis of that has been. So I'm starting to get through the figures now, but there's a massive bias towards spend on the roads of national significance. So in fact, a lot of the projects from Western Bay and Tauranga that were outside of the roads of national significance have also not been funded. And so while it's absolutely right that we've got, what we're seeing is a lot of funding in Tauranga and Western Bay, that's a virtue of the bias of the plan towards the roads of national significance. I've made the point with NZTA, and will continue to do that over the next little while, to try and make it clear at a national level why, for our economic development, state highways are so important. So, we're one of the, say, 12th largest council in the country, but if you take out the ones that are big metros on their own, and then take out the ones that are attached to big metros, we're right up there in terms of large centres that absolutely rely on state highways for our economic development. And we're working on communicating that a bit better within NZTA to be able to give Rotorua the profile we need to do. There are some changes in personnel at NZTA coming, so we need to work through this next cycle and make sure we have those relationships in place.
Thank you for that extra context. Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you for your report. Stavros, on page 39, you refer to traffic services maintenance, new road marking contract out to tender, and streetlight maintenance ongoing. An extension of streetlights contract is recommended. I'm aware that's coming up in the confidential session of council. I do have some non-confidential questions that I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to. There is some concern in the community from people that I have engaged with about how well our streets are lit, and in short, there is a perception that they're not lit very well. Now, I understand there were 4,500 lights replaced in Rotorua since 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
Whereabouts were they replaced?
In 4,660 locations.
Okay. I'll be a little more specific then. So there are some roads which are arterial roads. So is it a reasonable guess that roads like Otonga Road, Springfield Road, Malfoy Road, Clayton Road, these are the sort of roads that may have been targeted for these LEDs, lights?
Yeah, all those roads have been equipped with street lights, have been replaced from halogen to LED lights. Yeah.
So who decided what the wattage ought to be for these streetlight replacements?
Well, there are national standards defining that, wattage, defining what the street lights should, luminosity should be.
That would depend on so there's different categories of streets, is there not?
Yes,
so some roads
there is, in the road hierarchy, there is a definition of what the spacing and the luminosity of lights, depending on the hierarchy of the road. Yeah. Correct.
So if we had incorrectly categorised a road, then that would explain why some of the roads are underlighted. Here's a couple of comments which you may wish to respond to from a resident, in this case from Glenholme. They used to walk to town to go to dinner, but since these lights have been changed, and they used to walk home again in the evening. They're frankly reluctant to, as a result of both the issues on Fenton Street, but also the lighting in Glenholme. So would the lights in Glenholme have been changed as part of this?
Point of order, Madam Chair. Just on relevance, firstly, actually on the questions through the Chair, feels a bit like a cross-examination here. And then secondly, actually on the item being discussed, it's, it's going really, really into detail that I don't think we should, that Stavros should have to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. And I do take on board those comments because it was getting down into the detail a little bit too much, Councillor Lee. If you have some specific concerns, you might be better to take this conversation offline with Stavros sometime and get the detail that you need. This probably isn't the place for that level. Is there anything else that you might like to ask about the report?
Councillor,
Yep.
Chair. Yeah,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Look, I appreciate what Councillor Lee's questions are. Perhaps it's not the time to do it, but can I say that if a resident, a ratepayer, has a concern on a particular location, we're always open for that resident to get in touch with us. We'll undertake a luminosity assessment of the sites and report back to them as to whether we're complying with the hierarchy, road hierarchy. So no problem with that at all.
But that doesn't address whether the roads have been categorised appropriately as...
Well,
if they're being lighted for a residential street, but it's actually an arterial road, then the standards that you're measuring it against are flawed, huh?
Well, no, I'm not prepared to go down that path at this point in time because, again, road classification is based on national standards for what we call one road network classification. That leads into a whole range of decision making about what chip seal to apply, what width of the roads will be, what kind of facilities the road. So that's national standards. Now, if a resident believes that the street light spacing and luminosity provided in a particular street is not consistent with the hierarchy, please ask them to get in touch with us, we'll do the assessment, and we'll report. If we are wrong, then we'll fix it. If we are not wrong, then we will advise them accordingly. Because I think I'm not prepared to respond to a question why a resident subjectively might choose not to walk somewhere. I don't understand the reason.
Thank you, Stavros. Actually, and that gives the detail that we need around the whys and the standards. And if there is a specific issue, then you're happy to answer that. Is there further?
Yeah, there's a broader issue for me here, Madam Chair. This goes to our reputation rebuild for our city, and there is a line of thinking, if that's what it's called, CEPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, and when we have a proper, decent lighting in a city, it acts as a deterrent to crime and it makes the whole city more inviting to be in. And I've got people talking to me saying they can't see on Otonga Road sufficiently on a push bike and have had to get brighter lights. I've had a woman come and say to me who lives in Springfield Road, she fears driving up Otonga Road lest her car breaks down. And I think we've got a serious problem here across the city.
Thank you for raising it, Councillor Lee, and the concerns of the community. The CE might like to add some extra comments to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. There's a wider discussion around an update on community safety and what the plan is going forward, coming to a community and district development meeting near you. So watch the space and there'll be the opportunity to have those conversations coming up very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, could I just clarify? I got a little bit lost with Councillor Lee there. Could I just, and sorry to just surmise it, but is he basically just requesting brighter lights?
I'm suggesting that perhaps a review of how well our roads comply with CEPTED would be helpful.
I'll take that as a yes.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
fine.
you,
Thank you.
Councillors. Yes, address your comments through me, please. And the CEs cover that off, that we're going to do some work on that moving forward. Yes, Councillor Pat.
Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. I'm just looking at the report talking about water main renewals on page 4 of your report, Stavros. It says, in the progress category, following delivery of the 23-24 financial year package of water renewal network within time and budget, a package of work is currently out for tender with the aim to have a tender recommendation for the I&E committee in September. Was there supposed to be one? Did I miss something?
those tender recommendations were being concluded, and under the delegations you have assigned, the chief executive and the chair of the committee have signed those renewal tenders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's just been when we changed delegations of the CE, those particular tenders did fall under. They didn't have to come to this committee. Now, will go to Councillor Waru and then back to Councillor O'Brien. Thank you.
Tēnā koe te te amana, o tira kia ora anō Stavros, thank you. I'm not too sure if this is a question for you or Andrew, but I'll ask anyway. In terms of the, I suppose, the determination of the Transport Committee and how they've come up with a decision around who gets this one, what gets funded and what doesn't, is there a process in which we can challenge the decisions made by the Transport Committee?
Through you, Madam Chair. So I believe your questions are related to the funding allocation decisions made by the board of NZTA.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't believe we have the opportunity to challenge those decisions.
Nothing at all.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair, thank you again for your report, Stavros. Could I just ask, first of all, the State Highway Improvement Programs, the 5 items that we identified, does the current answer also reflect that program, the State Highway Improvement Program?
Correct.
It does, thank you. My question's around Tarawera, and Madam Chair, if I could also raise where I brought up earlier about the it being a minor matter. If I could just quote two paragraphs on page 9 of your report, page 45 of our agenda. The flow of agreements to establish locality plans and obtain building consents is much more than required and likely to result in contract extensions of time and additional costs to the project. Could I ask, when you say much more, in terms of the entire project, how big an item is this? How much effect would it have on the final pricing, for example?
We've got about 450 properties. The contract anticipates an 18 months period. 18 months period to be completed. That requires roughly in the region of 35 to 40 properties installed each month. At the moment, we have approached, the contractor has approached over 200 properties, and only 35 of them have actually signed locality plans. So really, if I extrapolate the current progress, we're looking into perhaps a 6 months delay into the project, which will have time extensions problem.
I see. Okay, thank you. I won't ask you to put that in a financial term because I appreciate that's virtually very difficult. The following paragraph says, staff expect to provide council with a status update approximately October, including any recommended actions arising from the property owners frustrating the stage 2 process. I'll try and put this as delicately as I can, because I appreciate for those residents it's a delicate subject. At part of that, will recommendations, can they be included about at what stage, if we do not have substantial uptake from the residents, that we, in spite of our previous votes, and I'm on record as saying I supported the current plan as far as we could, at what stage do we say, is it possible for us to have an option of saying we've completed stage 1 and it's now time for us not to admit defeat, sorry, that's probably the wrong wording, but to say there's a different way forward and leave it to locals to then do their own thing?
Now, I won't give exact time, but this is it. Some point in time over the next few months, I have to come and ponder that situation. I think there will be 2 clusters of residents. There will be a number of them who says, yep, we agree to that. We have a contractor in place who can help do that. And I don't want to sort of speculate on the, let's say, the uncooperative, properties. But though for those properties, we may have an option to say the main system is in place. Now you are required to connect, and you are required to connect by installing a specified system, and you have 12 months to do it. There will be no further financial assistance for that. If you don't comply, then you'll be non-compliant with all the unintended effects of that. So I'm trying to avoid that, but at some point in time over the next few months, it's an option that the Council, under the regulatory authority, may have to exercise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a subsequent? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
apologies.
just before you
Thank
do,
you.
the KRC might like to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just want to say that all our formal discussions with the community have been very positive. This is an overwhelmingly positively supported project, and the objectives of protecting the environment are unquestionable. And we're really proceeding on that basis. So I'm really keen to make sure that we continue to execute on that basis, and I don't have any intention to explore alternatives until we're absolutely clear that we have a change in circumstances, which I don't believe we have.
If I may, subsequent. So can I clarify on that then? The updates in October are unlikely to be more along the lines that I'm suggesting we may have to look at. Would that be fair in reply to your?
I think as the Chief Executive outlined, we're progressing on the basis of all the feedback we had from the community today. And I remind elected members that in October last year, we gave the residents up there an opportunity to give us formal feedback. Out of that, 75% plus said they had no intention to do self-installation. They wanted the council to install. So we're progressing on that level. What I'm going to do in October will give you a further update as to where we are. And then again, as the Chief Executive said, well, that's our intention. All I'm just saying here is that at some point in time, there is another option, but we don't want to explore it until we actually get to that point.
So could I ask you, at what sort of stage do we think that would be? Is it within the end of first quarter next year? I only asked this because, as you say, there's been apparently a communication gone out from one sector of that community advising their residents not to sign. Yep. So for me, at some point, the longer this goes on and puts up costs, not only for them, but also for the rest of our city and district, we don't have a blank check on this as far as I'm concerned. We make commitments after the lessons learned from Rotorua. We make commitments after Tarawera at the LTP hearings. So, I personally, and I'm only speaking for myself here, I don't have a blank on check for this project forever and a day. So at some point, it's either got to be a yes or no. And I think that, rather than pass this on to another council, I would hope that by next year we're further down that track of either one or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I look forward to the update in November, potentially, on that too. Councillor Brown, and we're just aware of the time. We've got about 10 minutes, councillors, so I'll just make you aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one from me. I agree with Councillor O'Brien's sentiments around this, but I don't think we need to grab the big stick out just yet. I think there's conversations to be had around Tarawera. Just on the Peka block development, is that entrance exit on State Highway 5 or is it on State Highway 30? This goes to the NZTA funding again. I've got real concerns around safety with the developments, and the mountain bike park and the traffic that comes out of there is huge, and we've got large slow moving trucks. I think NZTA are completely out of line with not considering safety. But sorry, the question is, Peka block, is it State Highway 5 in and out, or is it State Highway 30? Do we know?
At the moment, it's State Highway 5 in and out. And of course, with the progression of Peka block development, it will take maybe at least another year before we actually have people occupying those sites. But you're absolutely right. The NZTA worked with us and the Peka block owners and the Waipa Mill, owners to explore those traffic challenges in that area. and we have developed a solution for that. And there's been a costing for that. So it's not that we don't know what needs to happen, it's just NZTA has not allocated any funding towards that because it's one of our 5 priorities.
Thank you. I would agree. Highest priority, given the safety aspect of it. Thank you. That's all from me.
I hear your concerns too, Councillor Brown. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. Just to follow on to my previous line of questions, do we have any capacity to dim or to brighten the existing lights, or would we be replacing lights if we did want to go down the road of brightening up some streets?
No, thank you, Councillor Lee. No, the issue of actually remote dimming or adjusting light luminosity was considered in 2020. However, that would have cost us another $1 million, for which we did not have the funding at that point in time. And ZTA funded 85% of the capital improvement at that stage, but it was just for the straight replacement. And that is technology can be applied, but then you have to consider in due course as to what kind of investment priorities you want to apportion to that. But the technology is available, but the installation did not provide for that at that point in time.
So brighter streets mean replacing current bulbs with brighter lights. That would be the
different kind of luminosity, but as you know, LED lights can be adjusted internally too.
Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, just...
Sorry, could you clarify that, please?
Actually, Councillor, if you don't mind...
You have an LED light, the luminosity of the light can be adjusted up and down, if you have the electronic, regulator. So, we have those things are not installed on the street light itself at this point in time. So if we were to install it, in 2020, the cost estimate was about $1 million on top of the $2 million spent for that, or they were not installed.
Right, so they don't have that capability now. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. At that point, I think we need to just close off the discussion because we're approaching 12 o'clock rather quickly, and we've got a presentation then. So I'd just like to thank you, Stavros, for all your answers to our questions and your great report. Thank you very much. At this stage, before we break, I would just actually like to ask that we move into public excluded. We have 2 items that we need to discuss today. 8.1 is the confidential minutes of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting held on the 7th of August, and 8.2 is the approval of contract value and term extension 19/061, streetlight maintenance and renewals 2020 to 2030. The reason for withholding this information as being necessary is to enable Council to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities. I would like to ask for a mover and a seconder that we move into public excluded, please. That is moved by Councillor Kai Fong and seconded by Councillor Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against? That is carried. Thank you. Now, I'd just like to draw this part of the meeting to a close, and for the moment until we've had the presentation, then we'll resume about 2 o'clock for the rest of the meeting, if that's okay, councillors.
Can I suggest, Madam Chair, that we just take a short break now until the presenters arrive, and perhaps when they do, we'll be in the green room or just in here, and then we can resume?
Yes, thank you. I was just trying to find out where we were going to actually be. It is in here, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so a quick break, and then we'll be ready around 12ish. Yeah.